Hello and welcome to another episode of the Startup Operator Roundup. I'm Roshan Karyappa.
And I'm Gunjan Saha, and together we'll be breaking down the biggest headlines from India's startup ecosystem. Now, last week had a lot of interesting developments with this deployment of the world's first space manufacturing unit. Right, this is done by a startup called Varda Space Industries. Along with that, last week the Advertising Standards Council of India has released guidelines to tackle the problems of dark patterns and promote transparency in digital advertising. The Indian government has also denied accusations of raiding Twitter employees' homes and shutting down offices in the country, as Jack Dorsey made these claims in an interview. And well, it looks like there's a tough time for short video platform Tiki, which had started in 2020, I guess. They announced that they'll be shutting shop later in July, and they're citing reasons of monetization challenges and competition as reasons. So a lot of interesting topics. Let's deep dive into this and see what we can learn from them. Roshan, but before we begin, Bangalore is getting crazily hot. So what are you doing to stay cool?
Yeah, it is getting warmer. I'm trying to do everything legally, ethically, morally possible to cool my heels. But yeah, hopefully we'll have some showers soon enough and like regular showers, and things will cool down. But it seems like the startup activity is heating up, huh?
Okay, but before we begin, last week Djokovic won his 23rd Grand Slam. I mean, that's such a amazing feat.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. 23 Grand Slams. If you told me this, maybe even 5 years ago, 7 years ago, I would think that, you're probably a bit ambitious with the numbers. But what an era of tennis that we're witnessing, Federer, Nadal, Djokovic. And yeah, sorry, Federer fans, sorry, Nadal fans. I think he is the GOAT. You may have your favorites, of course, right? But the best something has to be an objective measure, right? 23 Grand Slams puts him above the rest for sure, right? And yeah, even in other sports, whether it's Tendulkar, whether it is Jordan or Phelps or whatever, right? There is an objective measure to that. So yeah, fantastic stuff, and a lesson for all of us to learn from as well, right? I keep saying that we have to go long and let our learnings compound, and also be fit enough for newer challenges every year. And yeah, Djokovic has done exactly that. He's well past his 35, 36, and he's still playing at his prime, and he may even play another couple of years as well, right? So yeah, fantastic stuff.
Sounds like you're a hardcore Djokovic fan.
I'm actually a Federer fan. But I have no problem admitting that Djokovic is the GOAT. Yeah.
Well, talking about things going above, there's a company that is literally building a factory above everyone else. That's in outer space.
Nice segue.
Varda Space Industries is aiming to produce materials in space that cannot be made on Earth or can be made faster and with higher quality in microgravity. The company's first satellite W Series 1 was recently launched into orbit, and its first mission will focus on researching in space development for a drug that is used to treat HIV and COVID 19. Varda has also signed an agreement with the US Air Force to conduct hypersonic test flights for re entry vehicles. I think it was only in science fiction comics or movies that we saw the space manufacturing units which used to help in interstellar explorations, and right now it's becoming a reality.
Yeah. See, there's been a criticism of startups for a long time that, money goes into frivolous solutions, very, very first world kind of problems and whatnot, right? But I've always believed that, if you play this out to any length of time, the money will find itself into deep tech, into core science, engineering, and so on. And then that's what is really happening. And of course, WADA was incubated by the Founders Fund, right? Which is, Peter Thiel's $6 billion fund for startups. And they've done really well. They've got a bunch of SpaceX folks and so on together to really research and build stuff out, right? So I'm actually very excited. And this is a pioneering innovation, and which is why we're covering it on this roundup, even though they're not an Indian startup per se. But I'm sure that, we can take a leaf out of their book, and we have our own startups, right? Skyroad, Pixel, Agnikul, all of these folks, and they're trying to do amazing stuff as well. So, yeah, the space race is going to heat up again, I suppose.
Okay, so last week there's a very interesting interview with the former CEO and founder of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, right? And in that interview, he really called out the Indian government for the way it quote unquote misused its power, right? Jack Dorsey claimed that the Indian government raided the homes of Twitter India employees, shut down its offices in India, and even asked Twitter to block a lot of handles that were not, let's say, speaking in favor of the government, right? But to that, the Union Minister of IT, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, has denied all these claims and stated that the government was only looking for compliance with Indian laws. Now, what do you make of this? Twitter has been engaged in several lawsuits with the country, and yeah, what do you make of this?
So Twitter has this tendency, or rather, at least had this tendency to function as a sort of a supranational entity for a while, right? I mean, which is that they're above all these laws and regulations, right? They're a sovereign unto themselves. But oddly, I mean, if it's Europe or if it's other parts of the West, right? I mean, US and so on, they can comply with their laws, but they have a problem complying with our laws, with the laws of Nigeria or Brazil or wherever else, right? And that's a problem. That's a real problem. So it's a bit rich for Jack to say these things. I mean, he tries to come off as this, oh shucks, boy genius, hippie kinds, who is just out to save the world, a champion of the liberal order, and so on, right? But as the Twitter files revealed, he's not that, right? I mean, he has his preferences, as everyone does, of course, right? But he has used his powers as well to favor one side over the other. We remember that Twitter suppressed that whole NY Post story on Hunter Biden's laptop, right, as it suited them. Then there were other cases where they published or they allowed publishing Donald Trump's filings, right? So they have played favorites, and also they have complied with legal requests from the US lawmakers, right? So why should they not comply with the requests from the Indian lawmakers? And especially in terms of misinformation, false accusations, and so on, right? I mean, so what Minister Chandrasekhar has said is that Twitter was in violation of Article 14, which is right to equality, and Article 19, which is right to freedom of speech, between 2020 to 2022. Several times, right? And that's what the government has brought up and filed a claim saying that, hey, you can't be this way, right? In fact, I mean, one of the first things that Elon Musk said when he took over was that they will comply with the laws and regulations of a particular country, He's doing that with Turkey, for instance, right? Turkish government has asked him to take down stuff, and he is complying with that, because obviously companies, as most companies do, have to comply with laws and regulation, right? Irrespective of governments, right? Now, whether it is one government or the other. And there's just so much of opacity around the way these social platforms, function. Whether it is, what kind of news or information they favor, or how they deplatform people, how they're able to ban, block people at random without any recourse, and so on, right? So it's just a little absurd for Jack to come out of the wilderness and talk about these things, right? But it's a good response. I really liked Mr. Chandrasekhar's response. I think it was firm. And all of this is a reminder that we need to put our interests first. It's funny and interesting that The Economist came out with a couple of articles on India and its relation with the US. I mean, one of the covers of The Economist had President Biden petting a tiger, right? Saying that India is not a reliable ally or something of that sort. We've graduated in some way from snake charmers, flying carpets, cows and whatnot, to now being called a tiger, at least, right? In some way. Yeah, and there was this other interview of Dr. Jaishankar, our external affairs minister, and they seem to be surprised that India is putting its own interests ahead of the US, right? Seems remarkable to me why anyone would be surprised about that. But yeah, it's interesting. Geopolitics is starting to impact every particular thing in current affairs, and yeah, we should all be apprised of it, I suppose.
Okay, but closer home, social media platforms seem to be kind of struggling. Last week, Tiki announced that it will be shutting down operations effective June 28 due to the recent challenges faced by the tech industry. Tiki will delete all user data from its servers in India and Singapore after the shutdown. Tiki has managed more than 100 million downloads on Google Play Store and was ranked among the top 30 grossing apps on the Google Play Store in India. But it's not only techie, multiple short video platforms have shuttered operations, most recently including the likes of Bigo Live, WeChat, Hello, and Likey. And not only techie, the likes of ShareChat and Chingari have also seen their founders quit. Then Trell's biggest backer, Sequoia, exited in February 2023 at a staggering 78% loss. So we're kind of now seeing that all the hype which we saw in 2020, 2021 about this short video platform, the whole influencer economy, what does this mean for them?
Well, I mean, a lot of these apps benefited from the Indian government banning Chinese apps, right? I mean, predominantly TikTok, whether it was Moj or ShareChat or some of the others you mentioned. Short video content, obviously, all of us love, shorts and reels and all of those things. Lesser said, the better about this doom scrolling habit that all of us have picked up. But it is a great format, but where is the monetization? That is a key part, right? Because they may have reach, they may have decent engagement, but how will they turn over a buck, right now at this point it's still advertising, or it's still some kind of digital swag and so on and so forth, right? All of that hasn't really borne out at scale, for any of these, even at a global level it hasn't, right? And so yeah, I mean, you're going to see all kinds of problems, because 2021, when there was enough liquidity in the market, nobody bothered about these things, right? Everyone went for growth. Now when the questions are being asked about profitability, about sustainable growth, this is when some of these more unproven business models will break, because you don't have the time, you don't have the money in the bank to sort of continue experimenting and iterating, right? So it's going to be a hard time for all of these consumers.
But what about use cases? Because something that's coming to my mind is this short video platforms or influencer circles would be great at pushing, let's say, e-commerce sales. Let's look at what companies like Nike, companies like Amazon is doing. So, I mean, on paper, it at least kind of makes sense to use influencers to promote a product.
No, it does. It does, but it's a bit of a Pareto principle, right? I mean, if you look at the kind of money that these influencers make, the top 5% or whatever will make pretty much everything, you know. And also, I mean, the amount of money that these folks will have to make to justify their valuations is insane, right? ShareChat was, I think, a unicorn, right? I think they're probably less than that right now. Founders have moved on apparently, but yeah, it's just an insane amount of money that they have to make, and how will they make that through these? Through taking a cut from these influencers. I mean, it'll be hard, right? Or even brands, for that matter. But yeah, I mean, influencers, brands, these will sell through social media, right? This whole phenomena of social commerce is valid, right? People do buy from references, people do buy from people they trust, and so on, right? But just that there isn't as much money in the market right now that all of these folks will get paid. I mean, sponsorship opportunities surely have dried up for all of these content creators and so on, right? So yeah, it's a interesting time for all of these consumer apps in this leg of the journey. And I think the folks who will weather this storm, right, the folks who will last the next 2, 5, 10 years, I think they stand to be win big.
Let's see how everything plays out. Okay, so for the talk of the town section is a very interesting tweet which Bijul Somaya, who is a partner at Lightspeed Ventures, put out. India is not for the faint-hearted, but worth it, right? And he goes on to put out a letter on Twitter. So, in his post, as you saw, he's outlining where India was a decade ago and where India will be. But Roshan, what were your takeaways from?
See, he definitely makes a very valid point, and Lightspeed has been investing in India, I think, since 2007 or 2008, right? And the ecosystem has definitely grown, right? I mean, the digital public infrastructure that we have is unparalleled. We're going to touch about 900 million internet users by about 2025, I think. Now, all these are phenomenal numbers, and these numbers enable massive opportunities, right? No doubt about it at all, right? I mean, and lately we are also seeing a lot of policy tailwinds also, whether it is the FAME subsidies in the case of EV, or PLI in the case of manufacturing, and so on. And of course, I mean, you've seen a bunch of very forward-looking regulation from SEBI and RBI and so on, right? I mean, on the fintech front. Um, but it's a market that is interesting, right? I mean, if you look at the large exits that VCs have gotten in India, I can think of Flipkart. What else? You know, there isn't another similar exit that venture investors have got in India. Because we're still young as an ecosystem, and that's the truth of it, right? And so it will require time and patience and maturity for us to give those kind of returns. I've seen exits of a few $100 million, maybe $1 billion, but nothing beyond that, right? And you saw what happened on the IPO market as well, right? A bunch of these folks listed, and their stocks have taken a battering, right? So we are still learning all of that. I mean, these folks who are listed again will learn how to operate a publicly traded company, right? And the next iteration and the next version of that, they will be far better, right? So yeah, I mean, I buy his entire premise and point that India deserves patience. It's not for the faint-hearted, right? You can't just dip your toes in here, and get a sense of it, get a feel for it, right? You really have to immerse yourself. And yeah, I mean, with Sequoia as well, right? I mean, it shows a commitment to India and Southeast Asia. Right? They have a $2.8 billion fund focused here, and they're in it for the long term. So India is going to be a very exciting place in the next 10 years. The amount of innovation, the amount of entrepreneurship that's going to happen. So I'm really positive about it.
Well, if you want to be updated more about positive stories from Indian startup ecosystem, please do check out the Startup Operator podcast. If you enjoy the show, please share it with other people who you think will like it. And yeah, until then, keep supporting us, and we'll see you again in the next episode. Take care.